The message came at dawn, delivered by a probe that materialized out of empty space and vanished before the docking sensors could finish their scan. Station Commander Yiva Dorn was reviewing cargo manifests when her aide stepped into the office and set a datapad on her desk without a word. Her aide had a gift for that, carrying terrible things quietly, as though the silence would soften whatever was inside. Yiva picked it up. She read the first paragraph. She set down her tea. She read it again. It was a declaration of war. Not the kind she had imagined in officer training. No proximity alarms, no emergency broadcasts crackling through the station's hull, no distant flash of weapons fire through the viewport. Just a document, 41 pages, section headers, numbered clauses, footnotes referencing prior galactic accords she had never encountered. A golden seal in the top corner, the mark of righteous engagement, belonging to something called the Vael Sovereignty, stamped with the quiet confidence of a civilization that had been doing this for a very long time. She read every page. Clause 2 established the start date, 30 days from today. Clause 5 designated the combat zone, a stretch of dead space called the Ashen Corridor, 60 million kilometers from the nearest inhabited body. Clause 12 listed protected infrastructure. Clause 19 outlined prisoner handling. Clause 38 defined ceasefire communication windows. Clause 41 was a glossary. The declaration of war had a glossary. Yiva read it front to back. Then she sat very still. Outside her window, Outpost Crestfall went about its business, cargo loaders crossing the upper dock, engineers heading to the reactor level, 2 children from the residential wing chasing each other down the corridor, both of them laughing about something that had absolutely nothing to do with any of this. She picked up her comm unit. "Get me Admiral Okafor," she said. "I don't care what time it is at Fleet Command. Get her now." Admiral Imara Okafor read the document at her desk in the early hours of the following morning. She had spent 34 years solving problems that came without instructions. She read the declaration once, then passed it to her legal staff. Her legal staff passed it to the xenolinguistics team. The xenolinguist on duty, Dr. Emeka Sosa, confirmed that the document was precisely what it appeared to be, a formal, cross-referenced, legally structured declaration of war from a civilization called the Vael Sovereignty, who had apparently been conducting their conflicts this way for 7,000 years and saw absolutely no reason to stop. Dr. Sosa set the document on the conference table and looked at Okafor across the room. "They've told us exactly where they want to fight," he said. "I see that. And when? Yes. And what they will not strike." He paused. "Admiral, they've sent us their complete list of limitations, in writing, with footnotes." The room went quiet. The kind of quiet that settles when a group of intelligent people all arrive at the same conclusion simultaneously, and nobody wants to be the first to say it. Okafor picked up her comm unit. "Get me Admiral Okafor," she said. "I don't care what time it is at Fleet Command. Get her now." Supreme Commander Drav Hen received the human response. He read it personally. He had led the Sovereignty's 3rd expansion fleet for 11 years. He had fought 4 declared wars. He had won 3 and negotiated an honorable ceasefire on the 4th. He was a patient man, experienced in the careful choreography of civilized conflict. He read the human response. He read it again. Received. He placed the datapad at the center of the command table in front of his senior staff. They've accepted terms, he said. His chief strategist, Lorne Ashev, looked at the message, then at the Supreme Commander, then back at the message. There's no counter-proposal on engagement coordinates, Lorne said slowly. A minor point, they'll confirm through proper channels. They haven't requested compact arbitration contact. They're new to formal conflict. There will be procedural gaps. Lorne went quiet. He had a narrow face that had been trained through decades of service to reveal nothing. But something moved behind his eyes, a small, careful, private thing. "Sir," he said, "should we request clarification?" Han looked at him. "We've issued a formal declaration. They've acknowledged it. The process is complete." "Yes, sir." "Proceed to preparation phase." "Yes, sir."
The meeting ended. The staff filed out. Lorne was last. He paused at the threshold and looked back at that single word still glowing on the datapad. Received. He thought about it on the walk back to his office. He thought about the 41 clauses the Sovereignty had composed with such care, every detail provided, every limitation named, every boundary drawn in clean, legible language. He thought about the humans reading all of it, responding with a single word. He sat at his desk and opened the intelligence file on humanity. It was thinner than he expected. Humanity had only recently reached contested space. They hadn't signed the compact. The Sovereignty's analysts had noted this without significant concern. Non-signatory species almost always aligned their conduct with compact norms once formal conflict became imminent. It was simply what developing civilizations did once they understood the shape of the galaxy they had entered. Lorne scrolled to the military history section. It was larger than the rest of the file combined. He opened it. He read for 20 minutes. Then he closed it. Then he opened it again and read for 2 more hours. When he finished, he sat very still and looked at the wall across from him. The wall was pale gray and offered no useful information. Lorne had a habit. Private notes, kept separate from official records. He opened his personal log and typed 4 words. "We should ask first." He sat with it for a long time. Then he closed the log without sending anything to anyone, because the Supreme Commander had already called the preparation phase, and Lorne Ashev was a man who believed in process. He closed the human military history file. He opened it again. He closed it. 30 days passed the way 30 days before a war always pass, faster than they should, and full of entirely the wrong kind of silence. On the morning the Vael fleet reached the Ashen Corridor, fleet scholar Ren Vaughn was in his study aboard the command vessel, reviewing compact commentary for the post-conflict legal team. Ren was not a soldier. He was, by training and by nature, a scholar of conflict law. 43 years studying how the rules of war developed, how they held, how they fractured, and how civilizations rebuilt them after. He had been assigned to this fleet because conflicts with non-signatories required documentation, and documentation required someone who understood precisely what was being documented. He was a careful man. He noticed things others didn't bother looking for. Which was why, at the 7th hour, when the fleet reached the Ashen Corridor and held formation and waited, Ren looked up from his notes and checked the long-range scans. He checked them again. "Run full spectrum," he told his aide, a young officer named Tall, who still had the expression of someone who believed the universe would eventually make sense if you studied it hard enough. "Already running, scholar. Full range, full spectrum." Silence. "Nothing," Tall said finally. No human vessels in corridor range, no human vessels in adjacent sectors. Wren stood slowly. He walked to the scan display. He looked at it the way a person looks at a door that should be locked and isn't. "Where are they?" he said, not to Tall, not to anyone, just out loud, into the quiet of the room, a question placed in the air and left there. The fleet held formation for 7 hours. The humans did not come. Wren went back to his desk. He picked up his compact notes and set them back down. He opened the human military history file, the same file Lorne had opened 30 days ago, and began with the slow attention of a man who suspects he has missed something large, to read. He had been reading for 40 minutes when his communicator activated. Emergency reports. Frontier sectors. Human strike teams had hit a Vael fuel depot in Sector 14. Systems down, 60% of reserves destroyed in a strike so fast that the automated defense grid hadn't finished its startup cycle before it was already over. A Vael communication relay at coordinates called Marker's Point had been destroyed. Not damaged, destroyed, removed with such precision that the strike team had spent considerable time determining the optimal sequence of entry and exit. A resupply chain feeding Vael Forward Position 7 had been severed. Forward Position 4 was dark. No signal, no response to hails. 31 personnel last confirmed present 36 hours ago. Wren spread the reports across his desk. He read them in order. Every target was listed in Clause 12, every single one. Protected infrastructure, non-combatant supply systems, exempt from engagement under the terms of the compact that humanity had not signed, not been asked to sign, and had, apparently, never read. He flagged Tall. Forward Position 4, 31 personnel. Already checking, Scholar. A pause. Forward Position 4 was evacuated 4 days ago, sir. Standard compact protocol during declared conflict periods. Non-combatant personnel evacuated from forward positions within 72 hours of declaration receipt. The base was empty. Wren nodded slowly. He checked Clause 19. Yes, there it was. Non-combatant evacuation requirements, clearly stated. The humans had sent no acknowledgement of this clause. The Sovereignty had assumed, reasonably, Wren thought, that an unacknowledged clause was simply one the other party hadn't gotten around to confirming yet. It had not occurred to anyone that the humans might have cleared the base not because of Clause 19, but because they had been planning to destroy it themselves. Wren wrote this down. He wrote a great many things that morning. By the time the fleet officially departed the Ashen Corridor and began to assess the damage, he had 11 pages of notes, careful, precise, and completely unable to add up to anything that made sense inside the framework he had used his entire career.
Supreme Commander Hen stood in the fleet command room, looking at the damage reports with an expression that had moved past anger into something colder and quieter. "They've violated 14 separate compact clauses," he said. 17, Lorne said from across the room. His voice was perfectly flat. He had been flat all morning. "I counted 17. Find their fleet. Engage them at the Ashen Corridor as planned." A very small pause. "We don't know where their fleet is, sir." The room went still. "What do you mean?" "There's no fleet formation, no identifiable concentration point. The strike teams appear to be operating independently across multiple sectors. Long-range scans show individual human vessels distributed across a 30-light-year radius, none of them near the corridor, none moving in any pattern our models can track." A longer pause. "That's not how a fleet operates," Hen said. "No, sir. That's not how anything operates." Lorne said nothing. In the corner, Wren sat with his notes and thought, that's how a species operates when it has been fighting wars for 10,000 years and was never told there was supposed to be a different way. He did not say this aloud. It wasn't his place. He watched the Supreme Commander turn back to the display screens and noted the exact moment when Hen's certainty developed a crack, small, barely visible, like a hairline fracture in something that had always appeared solid. Then he went back to his desk and kept reading. The military history section of the Human Intelligence file was vast in a way that the word large failed to capture. Wren moved through the early sections, population data, expansion records, first contact logs, and then reached the military records. He had glanced at this section once before and registered that it was extensive. Now, reading with a specific question in mind, he understood he had significantly underestimated it. Humanity had been fighting documented, recorded, studied wars for approximately 10,000 years. The early records were incomplete in places, but what existed painted a picture so dense and layered that somewhere around his third hour of reading, Wren felt a sensation he couldn't immediately name. He named it eventually. It was the feeling of looking down from a very great height. Every technique the humans had used in this conflict, they had used on each other first. The precision infrastructure strikes, the supply chain severing, the coordinated independent teams operating without a central formation. All of it existed in human military writing. Not because humans had developed it against the Vael, but because they had developed it against themselves. The earliest documented use of coordinated supply disruption as a primary war strategy was dated approximately 8,000 years before humanity had left their own planet. 8,000 years. The Vael Compact was 7,000 years old. It was considered ancient. It was the bedrock of civilized warfare across 15 spacefaring species. Humanity had been hitting each other's supply lines 1,000 years before the Compact existed. Wren requested the intercepted communications from the human strike teams. He had hoped to find strategy, a deliberate decision to disregard the Compact terms, something calculated, something that fit into a framework he understood. The logs were ordinary. Team 9, Sector 14, Depot down, clean exit, heading back to rally point. Fernandez wants to know if we're doing hot food or rations. Team 3, Markers Point, relay gone, 2 minutes under schedule. Good work. Anyone know if the medic cleared Osei for duty? She's been grounded since Tuesday. Team 17, forward position 4. Already clear when we arrived, moving to secondary. Chukwu keeps asking about leave rotation. I'll pass it up the chain. Wren read the logs 3 times. He read them looking for the moment he expected to find, a reference to the rules being broken, a recorded decision to disregard the document they'd been sent. There was nothing, not because it had been hidden, not because human commanders had been careful, because the decision had simply never been made. There had been no moment where a human officer weighed the Compact's terms and chose to set them aside. The strikes had been planned and executed by people who did not know the rules existed, who were currently asking about dinner and leave rotation, and doing it again in Sector 20. Wren sat with this for a long time. He had encountered this feeling once before, years ago, reading about a civilization that had not been destroyed from outside, but collapsed slowly from within, every system built to sustain it, failing one by one, until the people inside realized the walls weren't walls anymore. The word was vertigo. On the 5th day, Lorne Ashev came to Wren's study. Not to the Supreme Commander's briefing room, not to the command floor, to the scholar's study. This was unusual. Lorne was not a man who sought out scholars. He stepped inside, stood at the edge of the room, and looked at the wall of notes Wren had been building for 5 days, dense with cross-references, timelines, and questions that kept generating more questions. "They're not hunting for gaps in the compact terms," Lorne said. It was not quite a question. "I don't believe so," Wren said. "I think they're striking what appears strategically useful to strike. The gaps are something they fell through, not something they aimed for." Lorne was quiet. "That's worse," he said. "Yes," Wren said, "it is." Lorne left. Wren added a line to his notes. "They are not working around the compact. They do not know the compact exists. Every violation in this conflict is, from their perspective, a correct military decision. They are not malicious. They are experienced, more experienced than any living species, at the specific work of finding and removing the things that make an enemy function. They learned this from each other. I need to understand why." On the 7th day, he finished reading the human military history files and sat with what he had found. 10,000 years, weapon after weapon, doctrine layered over doctrine, each one a response to what the previous war had revealed. The scale alone was not what stopped him. What stopped him was something else, buried underneath it, running parallel to the violence across every century of human history. The attempts to limit it. There had been treaties, agreements, laws of war, built and signed and broken and rebuilt again, an entire persistent structure of human effort raised across generations, trying to give shape to something that kept going shapeless. Deep in a footnote from the mid-period section on Earth conflict law, Wren found something called the Celestine Accords. He pulled the full document. He sat very still. He read it again. It was a compact, rougher than the Vael version, older, less precise in places, but it was unmistakably an attempt to do exactly what the Vael Compact did, to draw a boundary around war, to say this far and no further. Humanity had built it themselves, not because an older civilization handed it down, not under pressure from a coalition. They had looked at what they were doing to each other and tried, from inside the violence, to make it smaller. Then they had broken it. Then they had written a revised version, then broken that. 3 major revisions across 2 centuries, each one patching the holes the previous war had torn through. Wren stared at this pattern for a long time. He thought about the one-word response sitting at the top of the Sovereignty's communication log. Received. He had spent a week assuming the humans had known about the compact and chosen to disregard it. He had been wrong. They hadn't ignored it. They had never seen it. And they had been doing this to each other, this exact thing, this relentless, practical, entirely unceremonious form of war for 10,000 years before anyone thought to invite them into the conversation about how war was supposed to work. He picked up his communicator. "Tal," he said, "pull everything we have on human conflict law, treaties, conventions, humanitarian codes, all of it." Tal worked in silence for a while. "Scholar," he said finally, "there's quite a lot." "I know," Wren said. He had known since the first footnote. The damage assessments were completed on day 9. 2 fuel depots offline, the communication relay network in the outer sectors running at 37%, 4 forward positions below full operational capacity,
Supply chains to the contested frontier disrupted enough to push the fleet's operational timeline back 4 to 5 weeks. Not catastrophic, but it had all happened before the Vael fleet had fired a single shot against targets every commander in the fleet had been completely certain were untouchable. On day 12, Supreme Commander Hen authorized the Stillness Protocol. It was the Vael's most significant weapon, not in the sense of fire and destruction, but significant the way a definitive statement in the middle of a quiet room is significant. It changed the shape of everything that came after. The protocol targeted the neuroelectric systems of organic personnel within a defined combat zone, clean, precise, no structural damage. Affected individuals lost consciousness for 6 to 10 hours. When they woke, they were unharmed, confused but unharmed. Against the Sheriff Alliance, the protocol ended a declared war in 9 days. Their governing body had signed ceasefire terms before the week was out. The message was immediate and clear. This weapon could be deployed anywhere, against anyone. Resistance was merely difficult. It was biologically beside the point. The Vael fleet deployed the protocol against 3 human positions on the morning of day 12. By mid-morning, the picture was complete.
2 of the 3 positions had been empty before the protocol reached them. The humans had moved. Not in response to incoming threat, they'd had no warning whatsoever. They had simply moved because movement appeared to be a natural state for human strike teams who did not hold fixed positions the way organized military units were expected to. The 3rd position had been hit successfully. 12 human personnel unconscious, retrieved. The Vael had deployed their most significant weapon. They had caught 12 people. The human response came over the following 48 hours. It did not arrive as a counterstrike, a fleet movement, or anything Lorne's models were designed to anticipate. It arrived as 9 things simultaneously. Vael economic agreements in neutral space received information packages containing detailed records of sovereignty military expenditure, cross-referenced with Dominion civilian infrastructure budgets, delivered to Vael colony news networks at the same moment. Supply routes feeding Vael forward positions received contamination traces in their automated cargo streams, non-lethal but requiring full decontamination holds on 23 vessels, each delayed by 12 days. 6 Vael outpost commanders received communication packages appearing to originate from Sovereignty High Command, containing orders that contradicted each other. 3 commanders attempted to execute the orders before the forgeries were identified. 2 of them moved units to entirely wrong sectors. Wren stopped tracking specific incidents and began writing categories. He wrote for 4 hours, 12 pages of cross-references and a growing list of what the humans were doing, each one recognizable not from Vael military doctrine, but from the human conflict literature he had been reading all week. Psychological disruption, economic interference, disinformation operations, supply contamination, false flag communications. Each one had its own name in human military writing, its own history, an entire body of academic work studying when each method worked, when it failed, and how to defend against it. The Vael had never developed counters to any of them. They had never needed to. The compact prohibited such tactics, and every signatory had simply not used them, and therefore there was nothing to defend against, and therefore no one had ever built a defense. Wren set his 12 pages down. He thought about Lorne 11 days ago. They're hunting for gaps in the compact terms. He had said he didn't think that was right. He was revising his position. The 12 captured human personnel were processed through standard compact prisoner protocol, housed in the medical wing, fed, given access to personal communication channels, treated exactly as the relevant clauses required. One of them was Lieutenant Commander Savi Renault. Ren had requested the interview himself. He carried his datapad and his 12 pages of notes into the interview room and placed them on the table. He also carried the specific feeling of a man who is about to ask a question he is not entirely certain he once answered. Renault was sitting at the table with a meal tray. She looked up when he entered. She was a compact woman with a weathered face, the kind of face that had spent a great deal of time in places where comfort was not the primary consideration. Alert, revealing nothing she had not chosen to reveal. Ren sat across from her. "Lieutenant Commander Renault," he said, "my name is Ren Vaughn. I'm the Sovereignty Fleet Scholar on conflict law. I'd like to ask you some questions." "All right," she said. "Not tactical questions. I want to be clear about that." She watched him steadily. "All right. I'd like to ask you about the compact." Something shifted in her face, a small, careful adjustment. "What compact?" Ren placed the datapad on the table, loaded with the full compact document, all 41 clauses, all appendices. He slid it across. She picked it up. She read. He watched her read, not skimming, not performing, but actually reading with the focused attention of someone who processes information the same way, whether or not anyone is watching. She set it down. "Where did this come from?" "It is the Pan-Galactic Compact on Honorable Conflict," Ren said, "signed by 15 spacefaring civilizations, including the Vael Sovereignty, approximately 700 years ago. Every signatory uses it to govern armed conflict." Renault looked at the datapad, then at him. "We don't have this." "You were not invited to sign it," Ren said. "You were a pre-space civilization when it was drafted. It was assumed that when you achieved spacefaring status, you would naturally align your conduct with compact norms." Renault was quiet for a moment. "Who assumed that?" "We did," Ren said. "All of us." She didn't say anything to that. Ren looked at his notes. He had been gilding toward this question for 2 weeks. He wanted to ask it correctly. "Lieutenant Commander, during this conflict, your forces struck fuel infrastructure listed under Clause 12 as protected, communication infrastructure protected under Clause 9. You deployed disinformation against military command structures, which Clause 6 addresses explicitly. You contaminated supply networks under Clause 8's protection." "I didn't know any of those clauses existed," Renault said. The room was quiet. "None of our briefings mentioned a compact," she said. "None of our planning was built around any agreement with your civilization. We struck supply lines because supply lines win wars. We struck communications because cutting communications breaks coordination. We use disinformation because it works." A small pause. "We've been doing these things since before we had proper words for them." Ren had known this. He had read the files. He had spent 2 weeks moving toward this exact confirmation. It was different hearing it said plainly by a woman eating from a tray. "I understand," he said. "What I need to know, and my interest is scholarly, not accusatory, is this." He leaned forward slightly. "If you had been shown this document before the conflict began, if you had known the compact existed and understood its terms, would you have honored it?" Renault looked at him for a long time. She wasn't being careful with her answer. He had studied enough people to know the difference between someone deciding what to say and someone actually thinking. She was actually thinking. "Parts of it," she said. "Some of it is reasonable. Protecting medical facilities, protecting civilians in the open, prisoner treatment." She tapped the data pad. "Some of it is fine." A pause. "Some of it," she said, "reads like it was written by people who wanted war to be safe for the people who start it." Wren said nothing. "Clause 12, she said, "you've listed your entire military supply infrastructure as protected. That's not protecting civilians. That's protecting your ability to keep fighting. That's protecting the war itself." She met his eyes. "Someone wrote that clause and called it humanitarian." Wren looked down at his notes. He excused himself from the room. He stood in the corridor outside for a very long time, long enough for two of his staff to pass and look at him with quiet concern, long enough for the ventilation system to cycle twice, long enough to understand that what he was feeling was not the vertigo from before. The vertigo was the discovery that the floor wasn't solid. This was the floor being gone entirely, and the understanding that he had been standing on the idea of the floor, and that the idea had held him up for 43 years, and that he was no longer sure what was underneath it. He went back to his study. He opened his notes. He read through 12 pages of documented compact violations. Then he read Clause 12, then Clauses 9, 6, and 8. He sat with a question that had never occurred to him in 40 years of studying the laws of war. Who do these clauses actually protect? He wrote it down. He did not write an answer. He wasn't sure he had one.
On day 22, Supreme Commander Hen invoked the emergency clause. It had been used twice in compact history. It was a tool of absolute last resort, a formal recorded declaration that the invoking party required outside support. Hen was not a man who liked needing help. But 3 of his outpost commanders were still untangling the mess from the disinformation campaign. His supply routes were running at reduced capacity. His forward positions were drawing on reserves. His strategists were running models that kept breaking because the models had no framework for an enemy that didn't concentrate, didn't form, didn't position for conventional engagement, and was currently distributed across 5 separate star systems, still methodically removing things. He sent formal requests for coalition support to 9 civilizations. The responses came back within a standard week. Wren had asked quietly, without making a formal request, to be the one who read them first. He had simply been standing near the communications officer when they arrived, and had said in a calm voice that he would process them and present a summary to High Command. Hen had nodded, already looking at something else. Wren took the responses to his study. He read them alone. It took an hour and a half. When he was done, he went to Tall's desk. "I need something warm," he said, "whatever you have." Tall had never heard Wren make such a request in his life. He went without a word. The Sherath Collective's response came first. The Sherath were an old civilization, patient, measured, not given to excess in either language or emotion. Their response was 4 paragraphs. The first expressed sympathy with the sovereignty's position. The second noted that the Sherath had been observing humanity's expansion for approximately 50 years and had made a deliberate decision during that time not to initiate any armed conflict with them. The third paragraph was 2 sentences. The fourth was 1.
We recommend providing humanity with a full copy of the compact and clearly marking all military infrastructure before proceeding further. We will not be joining a coalition at this time. The Vorath Confederacy's response was longer. The Vorath had faced the Stillness Protocol during a border dispute 40 years prior and signed ceasefire terms in 8 days. They were a proud civilization. Those terms cost them something they had spent 4 decades trying to recover, mostly by building countermeasures against the protocol on the general principle that no weapon should find them unprepared twice. Their response ran to 5 paragraphs. The Vorath had on 4 separate occasions over 50 years seriously considered initiating formal conflict with the human expansion zone. On each occasion, they commissioned a strategic review. The summary of those reviews, contained in the 3rd paragraph, was precise. Asymmetric response capacity with no clear ceiling. No measurable susceptibility to conventional deterrence frameworks. Operational tempo that did not degrade under sustained pressure in the ways other species' militaries predictably degraded. The 4th paragraph contained the summary recommendation from their most recent review, filed 9 years ago. Diplomatic resolution is the only strategically sound path forward. We advise pursuing it. The 5th paragraph was 1 sentence. We hope this is useful. The oldest response from a civilization called the Aurum, the founding signatories of the original compact, with 12,000 years of spacefaring history and a period their own historians called the Expansion Era, that they did not discuss in detail and did not encourage others to research, was different from all the others. It was not sympathetic. It was not strategic. It was something else entirely. The humans are not aberrant. They are what war is when the ceremony is removed from it. The compact holds because every signatory chose to believe together that it represents something universal. It does not. It represents what 15 civilizations agreed to pretend together, because the alternative was examining their own histories without the protection of that pretense. We signed the compact because we looked at the expansion era and were frightened of ourselves. We recommend you examine your own history with the same honesty. The humans cannot threaten what the compact is, because the compact was never what we told each other it was. They have simply not agreed to participate in the story. We will not be joining a coalition. We do not believe pressure is the relevant tool here. Wren read this response 4 times. He drank what Tal had brought him. He sat with it for a long time. The following morning, he presented everything to the Supreme Commander and senior staff. He read the responses in order, without comment. The Sherath, the Vorath, 5 other civilizations, each containing some version of the same information. They had known about humanity. They had studied humanity. They had made deliberate decisions about humanity. And every decision arrived at the same place. He read the Aurum response last. When he finished, the room was quiet in the particular way it becomes when something has been said that cannot be unsaid. Hen sat for nearly a full minute. They all knew, Lorne said. Yes, Wren said. They knew and none of them told us. We never asked, and I suspect they expected us to find out the way they did, by engaging. Hen looked at him. What did the Aurum recognize? Wren had been thinking about how to say this for 12 hours.
"Marshal," he said, "we have been operating under a shared assumption, one I held without ever questioning it, that the compact reflects a universal truth, that all intelligent species, when sufficiently developed, naturally understand that war should have limits, that the compact didn't create that understanding, but simply formalized what was already there." He paused. "The Aurum are suggesting something different. They're suggesting that the compact is not a reflection of universal values. It is a choice. Every signatory looked at its own history, saw what war actually was, and chose the ceremony, because the alternative was—" He stopped. "What is the alternative?" Lorne said. "Looking honestly at what you are," Wren said. The room held very still. "Then the humans," Hen said slowly, "are simply honest, in a way that is very uncomfortable to be in a war with."